Okay, today what we're going to do is review the rest of the system settings. So let's go ahead and navigate there. We're going to go to Settings, Administration, and then System Settings. On episode 3, we covered all the different options here on the General tab. So what we're going to do is cover the rest of the tabs here in this episode. So let's go ahead and review formats. So here on the formats, what we can do is we can change it to some presets that are already in the system. So we can change it to English, the United Kingdom, and you see here that we're now using currency as a pounds, or we can switch it back to the United States, and we can customize this if we needed to. So again, there's a number of different items, whether it's number, currency, time, or date, that is, if we change it here, it's going to apply to everywhere else in the system. So something that's great to do if you guys are using a different first day of the week or different first day of the year, you're able to come in here and do that. So great things to know about. Take a look at it if you guys use something other than the standard. So auditing. So auditing is something we'll talk about and go more in depth later. But when it comes to auditing, what we can do is we can audit different fields. So was it updated? Who was it updated by? What was the old value? What was the new value? And that allows us to quickly see over time, have things changed and making sure that we're being aware of who changed it, when they changed it, and being able to go back and ask why they changed it. It's definitely something you want to be careful of, because this will quickly fill up your database, because you're tracking not only the current value, but you're tracking old values along with multiple different options around it. There are different ways to do auditing. Some people will create their own custom entity and create workflows. That's one way to do it, but to use out-of-the-box auditing, you would come on in here, you can turn on and start auditing. You can audit also the user access, so we can see when people are logging in, who's logging in, and where they're logging in from, so we can audit that. You also have options to track the common entities, the sales, marketing, as well as customer service specific ones. So if you want to track a specific area, and here if you hover over it, you can see what records those are associated, what tables that would be. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that turned off for now. We'll come back and review that more in full later. So here we have the email tab. The email tab has a number of options that we're going to cover. First off, something you want to make sure that you're aware of and have set up correctly is is it a server-side sync where you're connecting to Exchange Online, or is it using the email router? Which case you have to set up the email router separately, and we can review that in a future video if there's interest there. Down below, what we see here is the default setting. So this is going to be applied to all mailboxes that are created for new users. And so what we can do here is we can go ahead and set those defaults for everybody. What this allows us to do is we can go ahead and set, okay, what's the incoming email structure? Is it through Outlook? And so that requires the Outlook app, or is it through the server-side sync? So again, a lot of times what people used to do is do it through the Outlook. And so what that required people to have is their Outlook open for emails to be sent on their behalf. And so we're doing Outlook and not Exchange. So again, there's a difference between Outlook, which is the app itself, and Exchange being the email router and the email functionality. It's definitely something to be aware of, and make sure that you're configuring it either as a server-side sync or email router, or as the Outlook app. You do see here that by default, appointments, contacts, and tasks are set for Outlook, because that's where people are typically interacting with it. But if you have people that are on the go, that are using the web browser, you may want to go ahead and change this to server-side sync. You'll notice here that that's required server-side sync. You don't have the email router as an option, so just something to be aware of there. This next option determines how things are being processed. Does it have to be approved for users and queues? So this typically is what we have enabled. It's enabled by default. This allows us to create those users, make sure that we've gone through and approved the email mailboxes, along with making sure their email is set up correctly without it automatically just going ahead and using it. Again, that gives us more of a control and make sure we have a stopgap, and that people aren't just being able to create it, and that we are having a system administrator and a global administrator to come in there and approve things before something gets sent out. Next, we have the configure folder level tracking and email correlation. What this allows us to do is have a folder in our Exchange that can be directly tied to a record in Dynamics. So if I have Bacon Corp as a folder in Exchange and then have Bacon Corp as a record in Dynamics, what that allows us to do is go ahead and drop things in there and into that folder, and it's automatically going to be tracked against that account without me having to go in manually each time and say, okay, go ahead and set regarding to the Bacon Corp account or associate it to this specific individual. It's a great way if you guys are using consistently the same accounts and folders that you're interacting with to create those folders in Exchange, drag and drop it. And that allows you to do it even if you're not using Outlook directly. If you're using another app, whether it's on Android or iOS, being able to drag and drop those emails into that folder, because that email gets dropped into that folder, which then gets synced at the Exchange level and at the server level back into Dynamics. And so without having to manually go in there and do it each time. Next after that, what you see is correlation to track email conversations. So what you can do is you can set it up so that way when Exchange receives an email and that record's already been tracked in Dynamics, go ahead and continue tracking that email. A lot of times what you'll see when you first start up an environment is you have this concept of a tracking token. And so that tracking token, a lot of times people want to remove that. The reason that it's there is to more accurately track emails that are being sent out of Dynamics and being able to associate that correctly and correlate that correctly back with the email conversation. So a lot of times we'll see that people turn that off and use smart matching. Smart matching isn't as good because, again, that email tracking token is very specific and allows Dynamics to really track it really well. But at the same time, a lot of people don't like that because it looks kind of unprofessional. So something to be aware of there. Next, we have set tracking options for emails between Microsoft Dynamics 365 users. And so this is the concept of two users in the system sending emails to each other. How do we want that to be tracked? Do we want that to be tracked as one email? Or do we want that to be tracked as two separate activities? And so in order to reduce the size of the emails that are in there, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that so that way we only have one record for that email exchange as opposed to two. Next, we have set email form options. What this allows us to do, there's a couple of different things. And again, I'd encourage you guys to read the system settings dialog box and the system settings information on this to really understand it. But we have here is a couple of options. What happens if there's an unresolved email address? So if I send it to information@thebaconbytes.com, is that going to be received? It's not currently a record in my database, but is that going to be still sent out of the system? A lot of times this is automatically turned off, and so it's not going to, if it's unresolved, it's not going to send it. And this is where you see a lot of emails being sent to somebody and said, hey, I can't resolve this to a contact or an account. I'm not going to send it out of CRM. So by default, that's turned off, but what we can do is turn that on. The reason it's turned off and the reason you'd want it to resolve is making sure that you're then tracking it back to the system and tracking it against a record. If you send it out as an unresolved one, then it simply goes out as an email, and that email then gets tracked against an opportunity. It's then not being tracked against individuals, and so you lose that richness, that 360-degree view that you're often looking for when it comes to Microsoft. After that, what we have is the set system size limit for attachments. And so it's interesting because it's actually stored here on how large of an attachment you can have when it comes to notes. So often people say, hey, I'm trying to upload a larger note, it's over 5 megabytes. I'm unable to do that. And you'd actually come in here and change it in the email settings for notes in the system. I would highly recommend not changing this. Often people want us to change it, but if they're wanting us to change it, the reason that we don't typically change it is because we want to make sure that we're understanding why you need to attach larger files. If you're needing to attach larger files than this, you really should be considering SharePoint or OneDrive or Azure to do the document storage and the storage of files, as opposed to doing it directly in this Dynamics database. The storage cost when it comes to Dynamics is much higher than if it was in Azure or SharePoint. So things to be aware of. Definitely take a look at this, understand what it is. This will do attachments, whether it's the notes, like I mentioned, or whether it's an email attachment. It can be also tracked in here. After that, we have configure alerts. So there's different types of alerts when it comes to mailboxes. And so when an issue happens with a mailbox, what kind of alert do we want? Do we want just warnings? Do we want errors if they occur, or just informational? And so we can change those options so that way we can just see errors and warnings, and so that way we're not just getting informational ones. That last option there is notify the mailbox owner if something were to happen. Again, by default, you see that this is turned off. We don't want our users to be worried about it if something happens, but at the same time, maybe we do want to notify them so that way they can escalate it and submit it as a support ticket to us. So a couple of different options we're going to get in later, how to actually configure and connect Microsoft Exchange Online, and we'll see that in a later episode. Okay, next tab, marketing. So there's a couple of different options here in marketing. This concept of a mail merge and enable direct email via mail merge. That is something that we'll want to be careful of as they're starting to deprecate mail merges and mail merge functionality. And so just be aware of that. So the one I want to really focus on here is in the marketing tab is the auto unsubscribe option. So what we can do is we can go ahead and enable an option here. So that way we're going to have the unsubscribe option on the emails that we send out. So that makes sure that we stay above board when it comes to email marketing, because unsubscribe is a requirement for most email campaigns when you're blast emailing, is to have an unsubscribe option. And so what we can do is go ahead and present that as an option. And then what we can do also is use a template in the system to allow us to say, okay, we've acknowledged the unsubscribe and confirming that you've unsubscribed from this. If you didn't mean to unsubscribe, please click here and we can have you subscribe again. So again, something that's very interesting that they've added recently in Dynamics 365 that can be very beneficial for marketings. Okay, next area is customizations. And one of the things I really want to point out here in this video is this application mode setting. So what this allows us to do is when you log into Dynamics, that it automatically takes you to application mode. This is going to be different than if it was in desktop mode. A lot of times if this gets checked by accident, then people are starting to log in. They can't navigate around Dynamics. It doesn't look right, even on the web browser, because it looks more like an app. And so if you can imagine logging in and expecting Dynamics to look like the web browser, and you have all these different options, and then all of a sudden it's an application mode right here that it doesn't have those same options. And so definitely if you guys are experiencing sort of a different UI than you expect on the web browser, come in here, check to make sure that this is unchecked, and then continue on with your other troubleshooting things. The other thing you can do in here is look at how plugins are being traced. And so you can turn on tracing. Is it just the exceptions or is it all? Things to be careful of when you do all. This is now going to trace all of the logs for plugins. So it's going to quickly fill up your database as well. So typically we leave that off until we're needing to troubleshoot a plugin, in which case we turn it to exceptions. The other option there, again, would be just to leave it on exceptions. So that way you're catching everything. But if you're not actively monitoring that and clearing that out, that's, like I mentioned, going to increase the size of your database. Something new that came out recently is flow. And so you can turn on flow for the different areas on the forms as well as the sitemap. So we're going to go ahead and turn that off for now because we don't need to see it. Okay, the next tab here is Outlook. And so this is the experience and interaction between Dynamics 365 and Outlook. And so what we have here, the first couple of options are what happens when an email first comes in. So when an email first comes in, does it automatically check and get associated with existing emails in Dynamics? Do we go ahead and sync that over? Or is that something we still want the user to interact with and engage with and to tell it to track and set regarding? Or is that something we want to go ahead and automate that process? These next couple here are set whether a user can synchronize information from Dynamics 365 for Outlook. And so we can set, can users schedule the synchronizations? What's the minimum time between synchronizations? Make sure that it's consistently being synced. Can we update their local data in the background? So do we want to go ahead and schedule that to be automatically updated? And set schedule for address book synchronization in Dynamics 365. So what does that sync when it comes to contacts between Outlook and Dynamics 365? Do we want to go ahead and set that and schedule that between the two different databases? Again, what that's going to allow us to do is if an update gets made by Bob in the system, and then it's going to go ahead and sync down to the other people that have Bob sync to their Outlook environments. And so does that go ahead and get synced? And then the last option here, again, it's kind of hidden, but it's that get apps for Dynamics 365. That's often the yellow bar that comes across up at the top. saying you should get apps for Dynamics 365. Go ahead and download them here. And so we can either turn that on for users or we can turn it off at a system level here. Next, we have reporting. So reporting, this just simply allows us to say, what are the different categories when it comes to reports? So often when you are looking at reports, you have the sales, service, marketing, administration reports. But if there's additional areas and categories that you want to track, you can go ahead and create those here. You can remove the existing ones here or rename them. You also have the option here to set whether users can embed Power BI visuals. And so that's something that we'll definitely talk about and look more later, is how do you embed visuals, and there's in Dynamics 365. And so there's some great content already out there, so we won't get into that now. But that is something that at a system level, are we allowing users to do that? Next, we have calendar. Not a lot of options in here. The first one and the only one in here is setting the max duration for appointment days. So how long can an appointment last when it gets synchronized over? Is it 10 days? Is it 2 days? Is it 5 days? Is it 30 days? And so you have that ability to come in here and set that. And again, that comes back and plays a role when you're starting to set appointments and activities for people. You may reach a limit, and this is where you would change that if you needed to increase that limit for whatever reason. Okay, the next one we'll look at is goals. And so goals, we'll have a whole video and episode on it. But what I wanted to do is just review the couple of options here in the system settings. So when you set up a goal, it says, okay, for the 1st of January to the 31st of January, it's going to track all that. And then after 30 days or after 15 days, how far after that do we need to make sure we're updating that goal still? So what this allows us to do is allow it to set, okay, we're still making changes in middle of March for January's information. And if that's the case, what we can do is then extend this out so it's 60 days after the end of the month. So that way we're making sure that we're capturing all of those updates and that the goals are being updated. Often 30 days is fine because we're not going in and backdating things. And so it should be fairly okay. So the next one you see there is roll up recurrence frequency. So this is how often our goals rolled up. So you can't roll it up any less than 24 hours. So the most you can do is 24 hours on a cycle. If you try to change that to anything less, you'll get prompted with an error letting you know that it has to be at least 24 hours. Again, this is how often our goals calculated. So again, we've updated opportunities, we've updated orders, invoices, and these different records that goals are based on, but we can only update it every 24 hours that it's going to recalculate. You do have the option of going in and manually recalculating them. So that is an option, but at the same time, goals are specifically designed to be updated daily and not more often. So things to be aware of as you guys are setting up goals and working with sales teams or customer service teams, and you're using goals. Next, we have sales. So under sales, we have the ability to go ahead and set products. So when a product gets created in the product catalog, does it go ahead and activate that product, or do we need to manually go in there and activate it later? That again just allows us sort of that gate to make sure that we're not creating things and all of a sudden it's showing up there when it's not fully set up yet. So that again allows us to have some control over that. We do have the ability to go ahead and set the default price list, which can be very beneficial. Again, in order to reduce the number of clicks for data entry. After that, we do have the ability to control bundles. So how many items can be in a bundle. This can be more or less, and so you can increase and decrease that here. You can also say when it comes to pricing calculations. So is it automatically going to use system pricing as part of the calculation, or is it going to be manually calculated? And you can set that here. One of my favorite things on this tab that has come out is the ability to add discounts. So discounts, calculation methods. So prior to it used to be the whole thing was discounted, but now what we can do is we can go down to the line items. And so each line can have a discount on it, or we can do per unit. So as you guys are entering in unit, if it's $100 for each of the units, what we can do is say, okay, it's going to be 20% off each of the units. Again, there's a number of different ways that people structure pricing and tiered pricing, and we can look at price lists and discount groups, and we'll look at that later on the ability to do more complex pricing. But this is a place that we can do discounting and I'll enable that for people. The last one there you see is the product bundle. So how many properties can something have on a product bundle? The example that's often given is when it comes to software. So if you're selling software, it has the ability to say, okay, it's going to have, I need to know the number of users and the properties as far as what is the URL going to be and so forth. And so we'll get into, again, the properties and how to set those up and configure those. But here you can set the maximum number of properties that somebody can set on that. Again, controlling it at a system level, so that way you're controlling the experience and making sure that people are maintaining best practices for your organization. After that, we get into services, a couple of areas for SLAs. So if you need to structure your SLAs, they'll be in here, and we'll get into more in depth later. SLAs, how to configure and how to structure it. And so one of the things I just want to point out again is this one at the bottom is the ability to automatically apply the default customer entitlement when a case is created. Okay, close to the end, we're almost there. Synchronization. So synchronization, what we can do is we can set in here the system filters. So if we want to come in here and set system filters, and we'll get into this later, when it comes to Outlook or Exchange, what are the filters? So just sync over my accounts or my contacts, setting that up at a system level. We want to make sure that people sync that information over. What about synchronized fields? So here at an appointment, what is the appointment time? Those are fairly straightforward. But what about contacts? So what at a system level do we want to make sure that things are being mapped over correctly? So you can restore them to defaults. You can turn them on, turn it off, and go from there. So again, these are contact records in Outlook or Exchange, and these are the same fields, the corresponding fields in Dynamics 365. So how are those going to be mapped over? Next one you have here is offline filters. So again, at a system level, what are the offline filters? Again, this has more set up than just this one place, but you can set up the offline filters. So what are people allowed to take offline with them if they need to have access to it remotely? In the past, this is something that you've had to have the app for Outlook as opposed to the Outlook app. And again, I know that's simply branding. There's a lot of apps and a lot of Outlook kind of thing. You just have to install the plugin app directly into the Outlook on each individual user to enable that ability to take it offline. You can do synchronize when you synchronize an appointment, do you also bring in the attachments and bring those over as well? And you have some options here with contacts. Do you want to sync over all the address or just the mailing address? Do you want to bring in the tasks? And then also if somebody gets assigned a task in Outlook, and then also synchronizing resource bookings with Outlook. And again, this is something that's beneficial if you're starting to do scheduling. So that way, if somebody schedules something in Dynamics, then it gets pushed to Outlook. So that way it appears on their calendar so they can manage off of one calendar as opposed to going into Dynamics to see their calendar and into Outlook to see their calendar. Okay, last tab. We're almost there. These are previews. So this is going to change all the time. So I'm not going to get into each one of these and talk about it. I'm just going to talk about the concept of previews. So previews, when it comes to Microsoft Dynamics 365 and Microsoft and how they're looking at this is, hey, we think this is a good idea and we want to kind of field test this a little. It's after beta testing, but at the same time, this is not general release. It's not part of their the code that they're going to support and maintain going forward. This is an opportunity for them to put out features, allow people to opt into using these features, and allows people to give feedback on these features. So if you enjoy one of these features, make sure that you are then communicating that back through the different channels back to Microsoft, so that way they're aware that people are using this and that you have suggestions on how to improve these different items. The Outlook app started here. And so one of those things, when it started here, some of the business process flow started here. The other thing to be mindful of is sometimes they'll include things in this area and then remove it at a later date. And so you have to be very mindful of that and careful of that you don't build your business around a single feature that's in this area, like a very specific feature in this area, because there is a potential that Microsoft's going to remove that feature out of Dynamics. This is no guarantee. And again, when you look at the licensing terms and you read through it, it's going to go through and let you know that. So great, we made it through the system settings. I know there's a lot there, and I appreciate you hanging with me. The real goal here was just, again, make you aware of a couple of the different ones, some of the highlights of what's in there. Over time, this changes. And so by the time you're viewing this video, it may have changed a number of different options. They may have moved around, but hopefully overall you understand sort of what's in the system settings, what's applicable, and what you may find in this area. So if you like the video, please hit the thumbs up and leave a comment down below what you enjoyed about it so we can make sure we maintain that. The other option is to go ahead and dislike the video and hit the thumbs down. So lots of options for you guys. Okay, appreciate the time and look forward to catching you next time. Thanks.